Sign here, my stepbrother said, sliding the folder across the kitchen table without looking up from his phone. It's just the asset division. Straightforward stuff. I looked down at the papers. My mother had been dead for 11 days. The flowers on the counter were already browning at the edges. The house still smelled like her lavender soap, and he had already hired a real estate attorney. I flipped to the summary page. He had allocated himself the family home, the savings accounts, the lake cottage, and my mother's antique jewelry collection, the one she had promised me on my 16th birthday. What remained for me was listed in a single line at the bottom: the Callaway Inn. Property value: disputed. Outstanding debt: $34,000. I looked up. This isn't what Mom wanted. He finally set his phone down. His eyes were the kind of flat that only comes from a person who has never once considered that someone else's feelings counted as data. Mom wanted a lot of things, he said, but she didn't put most of them in writing. He tapped the signature line. The inn has been closed for 9 years. The roof leaks. The property taxes are 3 years behind. I'm actually doing you a favor. The house and the accounts require management. You're not here enough to manage them. I stared at him. My mother had spent 22 years building her life around the belief that her remarriage had given her children a real family. She had raised me to call him family, to forgive his patterns, to give him the benefit of the doubt even when the doubt was enormous. She had believed in him harder than any evidence ever justified. Where am I supposed to live? I asked. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. The inn has 6 rooms, he said. You'll figure it out. You always do. He stood up, brushed invisible lint from his blazer, and walked out of the kitchen. His wife, Petra, was already in the living room photographing my mother's furniture for a resale listing. I heard the camera shutter clicking while I was still sitting there holding a pen. I did not sign that night. I signed 3 days later, after his lawyer informed me that delaying the settlement would trigger a contested estate process, which would drain whatever remained of the accounts in legal fees. My stepbrother had timed it perfectly. He always did. He was not a cruel person in the explosive sense. He was something quieter and more precise. A person who had long ago decided that other people existed primarily as variables in his own financial planning. I took the pen. I signed my name, and I drove the 40 minutes down Route 9 to Harlan County, to the property my mother had inherited from her father, who had inherited it from his, who had built it board by board in 1931. The Callaway Inn sat at the end of a gravel road off the state highway, half hidden behind 2 massive white oak trees that had been there longer than anyone could remember. The sign was still standing, but the letters had faded to ghosts. The front porch sagged on the left side where a support beam had rotted through. One of the upstairs windows was boarded over from the inside. The garden my grandmother had planted was just a field of brown stalks now, stiff and frozen in the January cold. I pulled up to the front, turned off the engine, and sat there. A younger version of me would have cried in the parking lot. She would have called someone, begging for perspective, looking for a reason to believe it wasn't as bad as it looked. But I was 31 years old, and I had spent 8 years working as a property assessor for a regional insurance firm. I had walked through flood-damaged buildings in Mississippi and fire-stripped apartments in Cincinnati. I knew how to enter a distressed property and read it the way other people read a face. I got out of the car and started working. The main structure was sound. That was the first thing I confirmed, going room by room, with a flashlight and a notepad. The foundation was solid fieldstone, original construction, no shifting. The roof leaked in 2 spots, both repairable. The plumbing was cold but intact. The electrical had been updated sometime in the 90s based on the panel markings. 9 years of abandonment had done cosmetic damage: mold on the bathroom ceilings, bird nests in the chimney, water stains on the dining room wallpaper, but the bones of the building were honest and old and stubborn. I chose the smallest guest room on the 2nd floor for myself. The mattress had a plastic cover that crinkled when I lay down. Through the window I could see the road and the dark tree line beyond it. The county had no streetlights out here. The silence was total and unfamiliar. I did not sleep. I lay there on the crackling mattress and let the math catch up to me. My name is Rachel. My mother was Patricia Callaway Voss. She died of a stroke at 63, which is too young by any measure, and she spent the last 15 years of her life sharing a home with a man who systematically redefined the word family until it meant whatever was most convenient for him. My stepbrother's name is Connor. He is 36. He has a finance degree from a school he mentions in every third conversation, and a talent for making exploitation sound like mentorship. When our parents married, I was 9, and he was 14. He was never unkind to me exactly. He was something more efficient than unkind. He simply never acknowledged that I existed in any way that would cost him anything. When my mother got sick the first time, 3 years ago, Connor positioned himself as her caretaker. He moved into the house, handled her medications, drove her to appointments. It looked like devotion. What it actually was, I understood later, was proximity. He was managing the asset. He made sure his name was on her accounts for convenience. He made sure her attorney was his attorney's college roommate, for simplicity. He made sure every decision about the estate went through him to reduce her stress. He kept her grateful and he kept me distant. Every time I raised a concern, my mother would look at me with tired eyes and say he was trying his best. She needed to believe that. I loved her too much to take it from her. I stared at the ceiling of the smallest room in the Callaway Inn, and I let myself finally feel the thing I had been pushing down for 11 days. I was not surprised. I had seen this coming for years and I had not moved fast enough. I had trusted that love would be enough of a shield. It wasn't. It never is. Against someone who has decided the rules don't apply to them. At some point the cold woke me. The inn had no active heating, the boiler had been disconnected when the property went dormant. I pulled on my coat and went downstairs to find something I could use as a space heater. That was when I noticed the utility closet door at the end of the back hallway was warm. Not the door itself. The air around it. I pressed my hand flat against the wood. It was distinctly, unmistakably warmer than the air in the rest of the building. Like something behind it was generating heat. I tried the handle. Locked. I found the key ring my grandfather had left hanging in the kitchen, the one with 30 identical-looking brass keys. It took me 14 attempts, but the 14th key turned. The utility closet was not a utility closet. It was a landing. A 3x4-foot landing, and then a staircase going down. I stood there with my flashlight aimed into the dark below me. The warm air was rising steadily, and it carried a smell I recognized from my insurance work, the specific dry mineral scent of a climate-controlled space. Not a basement, not a crawl space. A maintained environment. Something down there was regulating its own temperature. I went back upstairs and slept until morning. I am not an impulsive person. It's not a virtue. Exactly. It's a professional habit. When you spend your career assessing the value of things other people have already decided are worthless, you learn that the second look is always more important than the first. In the daylight, I went back to the utility closet. I went down the stairs. The staircase was stone, hand-cut, original to the building, or close to it. The walls were brick. The ceiling was low enough that I had to duck in 2 places. At the bottom, there was a door with a combination padlock, the old rotary kind. And next to the door, bolted to the wall, was a modern climate control unit. Digital display, set to 57 degrees. The power line running to it went up through the ceiling and presumably connected to the main panel. The unit was running, had been running, based on the dust pattern on its filter housing, for a very long time without anyone changing anything. I looked at the padlock. I went back upstairs and found the key ring. No key fit. I went through my grandfather's papers in the study, 9 years of accumulated mail and documents, filed by his housekeeper, into labeled manila envelopes, and in the 3rd envelope I opened, I found a card in my grandfather's handwriting, for Rachel, when she's ready. Inside the card was a 4-digit number. I went back downstairs. I entered the number. The padlock opened. I pushed the door. The room beyond it was long and low-ceilinged, maybe 60 feet from wall to wall, maybe 20 wide. The walls were lined, floor to ceiling, with wooden shelving, and on the shelving were bottles, hundreds of bottles, thousands of bottles, dark glass, wax-sealed, labeled in hand-lettered script or plain paper labels with typewritten text. Some had no labels at all. The shelving was old, but the wood was solid and dry. In the center of the room were 2 long oak tables with nothing on them. At the far end, a second door, padlocked. I picked up the nearest bottle. The label read, Old Fitzgerald, bonded, bottled spring, 1938. Stitzelweller, Distillery, Louisville, Kentucky. I set it down carefully with both hands. I am a property assessor, not a spirits expert, but I was raised in Kentucky, and I am my grandfather's granddaughter, and I knew enough to understand that what I was looking at was not a collection of old bottles. I was looking at a ghost. The Stitzelweller Distillery had closed in 1992. Pre-war bottlings from their stock had become, in recent years, the kind of thing that serious collectors pursued the way other people pursued real estate. I had read an article about it once, in a waiting room. While I was on the clock for someone else's problem, I counted the shelving sections. 8 sections on each wall, 16 total, floor to ceiling, 12 feet high, fully stocked. I went back upstairs. I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The cold didn't bother me anymore. I called Diane. Diane had been my supervisor at the insurance firm for 4 years before she retired and opened a private consultation practice for estate liquidation. She knew everyone in the regional appraisal world, and she had once told me that her most valuable professional skill was knowing which phone calls to return. I need a reference, I told her. Someone who specializes in rare spirits. Pre-Prohibition, Prohibition era, early post-war American whiskey. She didn't ask why. That was one of the things I had always respected about her. Everett Moss, she said. He's in Lexington. He's expensive and he's worth it. Tell him I sent you and he'll actually answer. Everett Moss arrived the next morning in a pickup truck that looked like it had been used for fence work. He was in his mid-60s, thin-faced, with the kind of patience that comes from spending decades around things that take a long time to become valuable. He did not comment on the condition of the inn or the state of the driveway. I led him to the utility closet and down the stairs without preamble. He stopped at the doorway of the vault room. He stood there for a long time without moving. Then he walked to the nearest shelf and lifted a bottle with the careful, two-handed grip of someone who has learned what carelessness costs. He tilted it toward the light. He set it down. He moved to the next section. He did this for 45 minutes without speaking. When he turned around, his expression was controlled in a way that told me he was actively working to keep it that way. "How many people know this is here?" he asked. "As of this morning," I said. "2. He nodded slowly. He took off his glasses and looked at them instead of me, which I recognized as a person buying time to make sure they said the right thing. "Your grandfather," he said finally, "built something remarkable down here. I'm seeing Stitzel-Weller pre-war bonded stock, Van Winkle family bottlings from before the brand was sold, at least 2 sections of what appears to be old Fitzgerald from the late 30s. And he paused. "In the back section, I need to verify, but I believe I'm looking at original Pappy Van Winkle Private Reserve from 1941. He looked up at me. "Do you understand what that means?" "Give me a number," I said. "Conservative. Private buyer." He was quiet for a moment. "Conservative," he repeated carefully, "and assuming you moved it quietly, without attracting the wrong attention, 2 million, maybe 3. I kept my face still. "And if you took it to public auction, with proper provenance documentation and the right marketing," he put his glasses back on, 8 million, possibly 12. The story alone, a sealed Prohibition-era cellar, untouched for decades. That's not just inventory, that's cultural heritage. That's the kind of thing auction houses build entire events around. I thanked him. I walked him back to his truck. I stood in the gravel driveway after he left, and looked at the white oak trees for a while. Then I called Connor. He picked up on the 3rd ring, which meant he wasn't busy but wanted me to think he was. "What is it?" "I'm at the inn," I said. "I've been going through the property. There's a moisture problem in the back storage area, under the building, old pipes. I think there's a liability issue if someone gets hurt on the property before the estate closes fully. It could come back on both of us." A pause. "How bad?" "I'd rather not deal with it alone. There's also what looks like some kind of old equipment down there. Industrial stuff. Maybe leftover from the original construction. I can't tell if it has any scrap value or if it needs to be removed as hazardous. I don't want to make a call like that without you being informed." Another pause. Longer. I heard Petra's voice somewhere behind him. "I'm not driving out there," he said. "Just document what you find and we'll have someone look at it." "I need you to authorize the removal," I said. "Legally, since it's estate property, I can't just hire a contractor without co-signature, unless you want to sign a release authorizing me to handle the full contents of the property independently." He made a sound that was either a sigh or a laugh. "Fine," he said. "I'll have my attorney send you a document." "I was thinking something simpler," I said. "Just a letter, on your letterhead, authorizing me to handle all property contents at the Callaway Inn for purposes of estate clearance and liability management. I've already drafted the language. I can email it to you now." I heard him pull the phone away from his ear, to check something. I had timed this correctly. He had a dinner at 7, I knew, because Petra had mentioned it at the funeral, in the way that people mention things when they want you to understand they have better places to be. It was already 4:30. "Send it," he said. I sent it. He signed it 14 minutes later without calling his attorney. I know because I was watching the email the entire time. The document authorized me to handle, remove, sell, donate, or otherwise dispose of all contents of the Callaway Inn property, including any storage areas, outbuildings, and below-grade spaces, at my sole discretion, with all proceeds directed to estate debt reduction at my determination. His attorney would later point out that the phrase "at my determination" was not language he would have approved. But he wasn't consulted. Connor signed it at 4:44 in the afternoon on a Tuesday because he was in a hurry to get to dinner, and because he had long ago stopped treating me as someone who required careful attention. That was his mistake. It had always been his mistake. I spent the next 3 weeks working. I hired Everett on a consulting basis to catalog and grade the full inventory. The count came to 4,218 bottles. Not all of them were exceptional. Some of the more recent additions my grandfather had made in the 70s and 80s were solid but not rare. But the core collection, the bottles my great-grandfather had sealed into that vault, sometime around 1,935, was extraordinary. Everett said that based on the construction of the room and the quality of the climate control system, which had been retrofitted and updated multiple times over the decades, quietly, by my grandfather, someone had been caring for this collection with serious intention for nearly 90 years. My grandfather had left me a card with a 4-digit number. He had left me the property. He had left me the room that Connor had never once thought to look for because Connor had decided the inn was worthless without ever setting foot inside. I retained an attorney in Louisville who specialized in estate and contract law. She reviewed the authorization document Connor had signed and confirmed it in writing. The contents of the property, including all storage areas, and below-grade spaces, were mine to manage at my sole determination under the terms he had agreed to. She was careful and precise about it, which I appreciated, because I had learned the value of precision from people who used its absence against me. Everett connected me with a regional auction house in Nashville that had handled significant spirits collections before. When their lead specialist came to the property and walked the vault room, she stood in the center of the space for a long time without speaking. Then she turned to me and said she would like to make a call. The auction was scheduled for April, 5 months away, which was enough time to document the provenance, verify the seals, and build the kind of marketing story that the collection deserved. Everett drafted the provenance narrative himself. He was thorough, and he was good, and he understood that what we were selling was not just bourbon. We were selling 90 years of patience and secrecy, and a family that had understood the difference between something's current value and its actual worth. I told Connor nothing. I spent those 5 months repairing the inn. Not as a gesture, not as a symbol, but because the work was concrete and it kept me focused. I replaced the porch support beam. I patched the roof. I had the chimney swept and the mold treated and the wallpaper in the dining room carefully removed to reveal the original plank walls underneath, which turned out to be beautiful. My half-sister Lily came down from Columbus 3 weekends in a row and helped me repaint the guest rooms in colors that matched the ones in old photographs I found in a box in the study. On the last night before the auction began, Lily and I sat on the repaired porch with cups of coffee, and she asked me if I was nervous. No, I said. And I wasn't. I had checked the math too many times for nerves to have any room. When you spend your career understanding what things are actually worth, you stop being surprised by the gap between what people assume and what they've failed to investigate. The auction ran over 2 days. By the end of the first day, the Pappy Van Winkle, 1,941 bottles alone, had cleared $800,000. A private collector from Japan had been bidding since the morning session, and he was joined in the afternoon by 2 others, one from London and one from Atlanta, who had been following the collection since the preview catalog. The Stitzel-Weller pre-war stock went in 3 separate lots. The Van Winkle family bottlings drew a crowd of people who had been searching for them for decades. The final total was $11,300,000. I found out Connor knew when my attorney called to inform me that his attorney had been in contact. He had seen the auction catalog. He had recognized the inn's address in the provenance documentation. He had, according to his attorney's letter, several concerns about the nature of the authorization document and the legal validity of my claim to the collection. My attorney replied with a copy of the signed document, a copy of the email chain, and a brief note that the language had been reviewed and was enforceable as written. His attorney did not reply to that letter. What Connor did instead was call me directly, for the first time in 2 months, at 9 in the evening, on a Thursday. "You knew," he said, when I answered. His voice was different from the one he used at family dinners and at the estate table. It was thinner. "You knew what was down there and you called me about pipes." I didn't say anything. $11 million, he said. "It was sitting under that building the whole time and you had the same access I did," I said. "You signed the authorization before you had anyone look at the property. That was your decision. You manipulated me." I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the car sold for champagne money. I thought about the signature line at the kitchen table 11 days after my mother's funeral. I thought about the jewelry collection promised on a 16th birthday, photographed for resale while the house still smelled like lavender soap. "You authorized me to handle the estate contents at my determination," I said. "That's exactly what I did." He tried to contest it. His attorney filed a motion arguing that the authorization had been obtained under misleading pretenses, and for about 6 weeks it felt like the kind of thing that might drag on. But the contract language was clean, the email trail was clear, and my attorney had spent 20 years in estate litigation. The motion was denied. His attorney sent one more letter after that. Then nothing. The estate debt on the inn was cleared with a fraction of the proceeds. I used a portion to establish a preservation trust for the remaining bottles. I chose not to sell, about 400 of them. The ones my grandfather had added himself over the decades, the ones that felt like they belonged to the building. A consultant helped me develop a spirits heritage program for the inn, something the county had never seen before, built around the history of the vault and the family that had kept it for 90 years. I reopened the Callaway Inn 8 months later. The night before we opened, I went back down to the vault room alone. The shelving was lighter now, but not empty. The climate control unit hummed steadily in its corner. The brick walls were the same walls they had always been. I stood in the center of the room in the 57-degree quiet and I thought about my grandfather, who had locked a 4-digit number in an envelope and written my name on the outside and waited. He had understood something about patience and something about legacy, and he had trusted me to understand it too. My stepbrother had looked at this property and seen a liability. He had seen a number in a column disputed value, outstanding debt, and he had stopped looking. He had assumed that what he couldn't immediately liquidate wasn't worth holding. He had spent his entire adult life optimizing for the shortest distance between himself and the outcome he wanted, and it had cost him the ability to see anything that required a second look. I went back upstairs. Lily was in the kitchen making tea. The porch light was on. Through the front windows I could see the white oak trees in the dark, The inn had 6 guest rooms, all repaired, all booked for the first 3 months of the season. My grandfather's study had been converted to a small reading room with a single locked display cabinet containing 3 bottles, one from 1936, one from 1941, one from 1963. 3 generations. A placard on the wall explained what each one meant. Guests came from 4 states that first weekend. A journalist from a Louisville paper wrote a piece about the vault. A documentary filmmaker left a voicemail about the story. A collector from Denver left a review online that said walking through the Callaway Inn felt like stepping into the part of American history that had decided to wait out the century rather than be sold. I read it twice and then got back to work. I had learned something from a decade of assessing properties that other people had written off. Value is not the same as price. Price is what someone agrees to pay on a given day. Value is what something actually is, independent of what anyone believes about it. My stepbrother had looked at the Callaway Inn and seen what he expected to see. A burden, a drain, a consolation prize he could feel generous about giving away. He never considered that the most important things are often the ones that nobody bothered to look at twice. He chased the easy numbers. I followed the warm air down a staircase in January. That is the entire difference between us. And I suspect he understands that now, in a way he didn't before. I don't lose sleep over whether it stings. I have 11 million reasons to sleep well, and a porch that doesn't sag anymore, and the smell of old oak and beeswax in a building that has been standing since before anyone in this story was born. It was always going to be mine. My grandfather made sure of that. I just had to be ready to find it.